Part 3 of X. Gordon's patriot friends say that Kahl and his beliefs would be in good company were he to have been born 200 years ago. Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Morris, Henry Adams, and the other founding fathers would have welcomed him in their midst. He believed that life was not so dear as to be purchased at the price of the chains of slavery. He knew he would face disaster, but he was determined to be true to his convictions. He repeatedly predicted not only that which was to happen to him and his home, but also in the month in which this would occur, February, income tax season. He inexplicably let down his evasive guard in 1983. Perhaps he was born 2 centuries too late. Things are different now, many conclude. In some places, senior citizens are prohibited from saying grace over their government-furnished meals. Newspapers are not particularly interested in telling the truth if slant will sell papers better. For example, the New York Times did not print the story written by its magazine reporter who traveled the country at great expense concerning Kahl's death in Arkansas. Children are generally treated as property of the state rather than the responsibility of parents. Satan Claus is becoming the object of Christmas, as nativity scenes and such are becoming increasingly prohibited, and the season is returning to its original paganism. Kahl mourned this in spite of the fact that he did not celebrate religious holidays in his later years. Kahl believed the excerpt from Chronicles, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land." Gordon Kahl intensely loved his country and hated the evils he perceived being done to it with a perfect hatred. He realized fully that no great civilization ever fell primarily from foreign aggression. The culprit was always moral degeneration, apathy, and decadence of the people. Kahl had apprehension about certain elitist power groups. Some of his disdain was directed towards the descendants of Khazars and others whom he thought were parasites on the populace. His observation in Italy of supply ships being returned to America full of war refugees who obtained instantaneous citizenship did little to deter his suspicions. Kahl estimated some 5.5 million such immigrants based on census data. Centuries ago, when the Catholic Pope prohibited members from charging usury on loans, these people became the goldsmiths and then the bankers. One such person, Paul M. Warburg, came to America and lobbied heavily to establish a central bank for the United States. As a direct result, the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, and Warburg became the initial board of directors. FED, chairman, the Fed chairman. Warburg's aliens have taken over our nation, Kahl would proclaim. Warburg's successors, pursuing a tight money policy in 1929 and thereafter, did much to precipitate and prolong the Great Depression. Gordon believed the Rockefellers and many others changed their names and beliefs in order to help effect the scam. He believed the Bolshevik Revolution and the spread of communism was financed and contrived by these forces, as well as was most of the other international turmoil. In the United States, the Fed controls the supply of money, which it has changed from a system backed by gold and silver to that of a fiduciary paper or credit, much more flexible. One international financier, M. Rothschild, is quoted as saying, "Give me control of your money system. I don't care what your form of government is, I will maintain control," implying that the real power resides in the money changers. Thus, many constitutionalists, including Kahl, cried for the repeal of the Federal Reserve Act and a return to money with intrinsic value controlled by Congress, not by an independent bank which is never even audited. Thus Kahl would conclude our beloved Christian Republic has been transformed into corporate America. He was leery. Gordon and his family became aware during the saga that a judge has ultimate power. I'm the law in my courtroom, almost any judge will tell you, truthfully. What he is really saying is that American courts have largely been transformed into courts of equity, or Roman law, rather than courts of law. Thus, the judge can say with impunity, don't mention the Constitution or Jesus Christ in the court. Judicial discretion, a tendency of appellate judges to support lower courts, and a reluctance of the legislative branch to inhibit the judicial, these are some of the reasons for the situation. Only juries stand between this judicial tyranny and the citizen, and jurors are typically so uninformed and respectful of judiciary authority that they are typically manipulated and intimidated into doing the will of the judge or government attorney. Joan Kahl learned that power is an awesome thing, seductive, corruptive, and desired. Power is force just as law is force. A law is no better than its administration, its application. When power is misused, it can be devastating to individuals like Gordon and his son. The story strongly suggests that actions which are legal are not necessarily actions which are right. Laws and force are sometimes brought to bear where the circumstances do not justify them. Persons possessing legitimate power are sometimes mesmerized by a feeling of their own importance and omniscience. Their judgment is sometimes affected adversely, and their power is often misused. Gordon Kahl strongly felt that an objective or end, however altruistic and noble, does not call for the use of inappropriate means to reach that goal or accomplish that mission. If one is to wield power over another, he should assure himself that he is acting within the will of God for the benefit of mankind. Otherwise, it is tyranny, pure and simple. The Nuremberg trials after World War II established once and for all that I was just following orders is not an acceptable excuse for abuse of power, even though these trials were primarily rigged forums of victors. We must all remember what a minority of farmers and shopkeepers did for us all in the 1770s. Out of the disdained colonies arose a group of intellectuals on a par with any in London or Paris, never happening before or since. In part, it was a black tie affair. Mostly, they were young men in their 30s. This group of free-thinking and undisciplined traitors sought no less than to do battle with the greatest power on earth. This sedition was in the name of freedom and justice. The odds seemed insurmountable, and the task appeared impossible to the rational mind. Nevertheless, they prevailed, and right won that day, providing us with a tremendous republic. If we can hold it, said Ben Franklin. Let's try to do just that. De Tocqueville said that we could, that is, until voters learn that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. After researching material for this book, the authors made certain observations about Gordon Kahl. From temporary disgrace, he will emerge for decades as a mountain rising from the prairie in the hearts of men to view its summit. Will have to raise their eyes toward heaven. He was the Air Corps counterpart to the infantry's Audie Murphy. Although not awarded the Congressional Medal, neither was Colin Kelly. He was a lone voice without guile, crying in the wilderness. His insight in the wisdom of such matters as avoiding personal debt is akin to that of those who abolished the manorial system of serfdom. He is North Dakota's Achilles without a claim. He was God's child without hypocrisy. He was good fighting evil as he saw it, as a loyal sentry. He was liberty personified, opposing socialism and government oppression. Perhaps one can judge him best by all the love and esteem in which his family held him. A pollster running a political survey asked a housewife, "What is the greatest problem in the country, ignorance or apathy?" "I don't know, and I don't care," she replied. The single hope is the reader, after reading this book, would not provide such an answer. The authors on January 1st, 1986. Protester. He didn't protest love. He didn't protest neighborliness, human kindness, helping those in need, being close to the soil, to each other, in a mutual reverence for life and liberty. He protested government, and the government that was formed to serve us all. Declared war on one independent farmer, Maureen Murphy. Page 1, Chapter 1, Scarlet, question mark. Scarlet? No, I'm not Scarlet. She's my sister, older than I am. She and Larry are getting married come June. As for me, I'm a Texan, born and reared a Thompson in name, but really a Kahl. You may call me Little Dolly, if you like. Dolly is Grandpa's sister. You wouldn't know about me, I reckon, lest you have read about my mother's death in Odessa last year, or maybe about Grandpa's adventures in infamy. He was plain murdered. It was over 2 years ago, in June 1983. I was 15 years old then. As for my mother, born Linda Kahl, the police said it was suicide, no question about it. Really, I don't know one way or the other, but some peculiar questions remain unanswered. She was shot in the heart, and the family's pistol was found in the front car seat next to her, about 4 miles out of town. She had divorced our father so that she could marry this certain guy. He later left her for another woman. This must have crushed her emotionally, but it happens to plenty of women, though, and they don't generally go out and shoot themselves. I just don't know, kind of confused about it all. It seemed to Grandpa that the police would at least have checked the fingerprints on the typewriter, as she had typed a farewell note. Maybe a woman is vain enough not to shoot herself in the head in a suicide attempt, but a chest shot is risky, is it not? Then, too, Grandma said any farewell note should be handwritten. Well, Aunt Lorna, Mom's sister there in Odessa, thinks it was suicide because she opines that Mom would sometimes go into extreme states of depression from those of exhilaration. Grandma had just received a letter from Mom joyously planning a family reunion at Christmas. As far as I'm concerned, they murdered her, just as they did my grandpa, Gordon Kahl, the year before in Arkansas. Not only that, they then threw Uncle Yori, her younger brother, into prison for life for no reason at all, with domestic problems and all this grief heaped onto boot, the blame rests squarely on the federal government. So far as Grandma and I are concerned, no matter who actually pulled the trigger. Mom's death was a real loss to us all. It was just the last of a whole series of unnecessary tragedies to the Kahl family these past few years. Maybe Mom didn't go to church all that often, but she had the same deep belief in God that Grandpa and others in the family held so dear. Now, no particular denomination was preferred, just the close walk with Christ derived from being in the Lamb's Book of Life. Anyway, after Mom died, Scarlett and I moved up here to North Dakota with Grandma at the old home place. This was during the summer of '84. The preacher, neighbors, and kin had restored the house after the Federals literally demolished the windows, furnishings, and interior in February of '83. More about that later. Scarlett had already finished high school, but I still had 2 more years to go. Boy, I'll be glad when school starts. It's a real bore out here on this North Dakota prairie. One good thing I don't have to attend that Bowdoin school, it's the pits, even though some say we live in that district. My granddad thought I was something special, and how all the family loved and admired that man. In a way, I'm glad he doesn't have to suffer persecution anymore for his beliefs. Many say he ran the course, kept the faith, and fought the good fight. He now deserves the peace of his heavenly reward. He was so kind, surely he has plenty of stars in his crown of glory. Most people who have heard of Grandpa Gordon and don't know him think he is a murderer and an outlaw. This story is for them. It's the gospel truth and the best as I can determine it. Of course, there's no way I can tell the whole story. That would take several books as big as Sears Roebuck catalogs. The story is so fantastic that no one would believe it if it were just made up. No one would believe that Uncle Sam has sunk into such a despicable level. Let the reader judge for himself. I'm going to tell it as it was told to me. In order for you to understand my grandfather better and get a gist of the story, take a gander at this portion of a letter he wrote in the evening after the Medina shootout in 1983. I, Gordon Kahl, a Christian patriot, and in consideration of the events which have taken place within the last few hours, and knowing to what lengths the enemy of Christ, who I consider my enemies, will go to separate my spirit from its body, wish to put down on paper a record of the events which have just taken place, so that the world will know what happened. I feel that the awesome power which will be unleashed to silence forever my testimony will, if not checked by the power of my God, who is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, cut short my time to leave to the world. Therefore, I'm going to make this record and leave it in the hands of those who I know will bring it to light, even though I may, in the meantime, be extinguished. While urgency or human weakness tells me to run, my spirit says right, so this I am going to do. And if my God continues to protect me, I shall write first and flee from the hands of my enemies later. We had just finished our meeting in Medina concerning how we could best implement the proceedings of the Third Continental Congress, which was to restore the power and prestige of the U.S. Constitution up to and including the 10 Articles of the Bill of Rights, and put our nation back under Christian common law, which is another way of saying God's law, as laid down by the inspiration of God, though his prophets and preserved, laid down by the inspiration of God, through his prophets and preserved for us in the Scriptures, when word was received from someone whose identity I am not able to give, that we were to be ambushed on our return to our homes. I realize now that we did not take this warning as seriously as we should have. The reason for this was because it had happened so many times before when nothing happened. I see now that the many false alarms were to cause us to lower our guard. As we pondered what to do, someone suggested that we take 2 cars instead of 1. Consequently, I went with Dave Brower, and my son Yori, Scotty Fall, and my wife Joan, and Vernon Wagner were in our station wagon. At this time, none of us really expected any trouble. But just to be on the safe side, my son Yori, myself, and Scotty prepared to defend ourselves in the event that an attack upon us should take place. As we came over one of the hills just north of Medina, I saw on top of the next hill what looked like 2 cars parked on it. About this time, they turned on their red lights, and I knew that the attack was underway. We were just coming to an approach, and I told Dave to pull in on it and stop. Our other car pulled in just beyond us and stopped also. I looked back in time to see another vehicle coming from behind with its red light on. I picked up my Mini 14 and got out and got myself and my weapon ready as a vehicle coming from behind skidded to a stop about 20 feet away. The doors flew open on it, and the 2 men who were in the front seat aimed their guns at us. My son Yori had jumped out of the other car and had run over to a high line pole. The 2 cars which we had seen ahead of us pulled up and stopped behind us. A man got out of the vehicle which had come from behind us and ran out into the ditch on the east side of the road. During this time there was a lot of screaming and hollering going on, but nothing else. So it appeared to be an impasse. About this time a shot rang out, and the driver of the car, who I believe at this time must have been supposedly in command, turned around and stood up, so he was looking at his man in the east ditch and toward the cars which had come from the north, and yelled, "Who fired? Who fired?" The other man who was with him echoed his question. At the time the shot rang out, I heard Yori cry out, "I'm hit, I'm hit." I took my eyes off the 2 men who were yelling, "Who fired?" and looked over at Yori. He was still standing, but I could tell he was in pain from the way he stood. About this time another shot rang out, and I heard Yori cry out again. I looked over and saw that he was hit again and laying on the ground. I looked back toward the two men and saw the one in the passenger side aim at me, and I was sure then that they felt the situation was no longer under their control, and the only thing to do was kill us all. Before he was able to fire, I loosed a round at the door behind which he was standing, and while I don't think I hit him, it caused him to duck down behind the door. I looked around again toward Yori and saw Scotty fall running over toward him. I turned my head again in time to see the driver of the vehicle which had followed us raise up from behind the door and aim his gun at Scotty. I moved my gun over and fired at him. Before he could shoot. I didn't hit him either, but the bullet striking somewhere near the lower left-hand corner of the windshield, he ducked down behind the dash, so I could only see his head. About this time, the other man raised up and aimed at me. Again, I shot again, striking the door and causing him to duck. This happened several times with the other two men alternating, and my shots causing them to duck each time before they could aim and fire. I don't know how many times I fired until the man on the passenger side fell, and I was able to tell he was out of the fight. The driver must have seen this as he moved his gun from Scotty's direction toward me. I fired several more shots at him. Each time he raised up to shoot at me. I finally realized this could keep up till my 30-round clip was empty. My bullets appeared to be ricocheting off the windshield and the doorpost. I ran around toward the side of the vehicle, firing at the door as I went to keep him down until I got around far enough to get a clear shot at him, at which time I knew he was out of the fight also. I ran back where I could see the third man from this northbound vehicle just in time to see him raise up to shoot at Scotty, who had run over to Yori. Before he was able to pull the trigger, I fired and he fell to the ground. At this time, I saw the man who was behind the front end of the Green Mercury raise up and aim at Scotty. He saw me swing my gun in his direction and he ducked down behind his car. I could see his feet or legs beneath the car, and I fired, striking him and putting him out of the fight. I ran over to the man in the east ditch, thinking he might still be in fighting condition. When I got nearly to him, he raised up his head and said, "Don't shoot me again. I'm all done." He had his hand on his shotgun, so I took that and his pistol, which was in his old holster, and threw them in the back seat of the Green Mercury. I didn't see the man who had been behind the Mercury and who I thought I'd hit in the leg, so I don't know where he'd gone to. A pickup had pulled up behind the northbound vehicle, but I didn't notice anyone in it or around it, and I assumed it was the one on top of the first hill as we came out of Medina, and which I believe belonged to the city, but as to who was driving it, I have no knowledge. Scotty tells me he saw one and possibly two men run out into the trees and hide, but I have no way of knowing who they were. I think from the reports I've heard on the radio, which was in Mercury, that the car which came from behind was the one the marshals were in. If this is so, they weren't the ones who fired the first shots. The two men who were in the front seat were both looking in the direction of the Green Mercury when they were shouting, "Who fired?" Yori's 45 auto, which he had in his shoulder holster, had either a rifle or pistol bullet embedded in the clip, shattering the grips on both sides. Had he not been wearing it, he would have been killed instantly. Whether this was the first or second shot that was fired at him, I don't know. One was buckshot and the other was either a rifle or high-powered pistol, from the way the bullet looks. I didn't see it, but it sounded as though Yori's gun fired after he was hit. I think probably his finger tightened on the trigger when he was hit, but I don't know neither he nor Scott. But I know neither he nor Scotty fired before this, and whether either of them fired afterwards, I don't know. I know that if they did, they didn't hit anyone, as I knew when I hit each one of them myself. I saw a man in the clinic when we took Yori in who I think must have been the man in the pickup. who pulled up behind what I think was the marshal's vehicle. He had blood on his face, and I think he was probably hit by either a bullet or bullets which glanced off the marshal's vehicle when I was firing at them. I didn't see him, and I know I didn't shoot at him, and I know neither Yori nor Scotty shot at him. Vernon Wagner was unarmed, so I know he didn't shoot at anyone, and Dave Brower didn't shoot at anyone either. My wife had nothing to do with it, other than the fact that she had ridden along with us so she could visit with a couple of other ladies who were coming to the meeting. I want the world to know that I take no pleasure in the death or injury of any of these people. I'll show you the rest of the letter later, but for now, let's get on with the story. I'd rather tell you the story than to watch those stupid soap operas and listen to the wind howl, which I do to break the prairie monotony. Perhaps the first thing you should know is where Grandpa came from. A little genealogy.